Welcome back to the Self-Esteem and Confidence Mindset podcast with me, Johnny Pardo. Today, I welcome fellow neuroencoding specialist Diana to the show, where we're going to be talking about the role of identity, confidence, and self-esteem, and many, many more things. And we welcome Diana back once again. We had a great conversation last time. So a quick introduction, and then we'll dive into the conversation. So Diana is a transformational coach, licensed elite neuroencoding specialist, brain health trainer, behavioral consultant, and grief educator. She works with women who are stuck and unable to move forward in life and are seeking clarity about who they are. So welcome back again, Diana. Great to have you on the show. So just an introduction for anyone who's new to your work or is coming across you for the first time. Yeah, tell us a little bit about what you've done all these amazing things, you've done all these titles, but ultimately what inspires you to go out and help other people, and in particular these women who are perhaps a little bit stuck in their life?
Right. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on your show. I'm happy to be back. And so what inspired me and really what happened to me, it wasn't really planned. Back in 2004, I had my first miscarriage. I eventually went on to have 3 more. And that whole experience left me feeling lost because I wanted to be a mom so badly. And I had this vision and would always imagine what that would be like, what that experience would be like, holding the baby and what their nursery would look like and all of those things, right? And so when I had those 4 miscarriages and realized that I was not going to be able to be a mom biologically, I felt lost. And eventually I went on to become a mother through adoption. We adopted 3 beautiful kids. And but I felt that loss of that whole experience, of carrying the child, of giving birth, of just everything. And of course, I love my children and they're wonderful. But that was a different experience. And I didn't know it at the time, but I didn't really give myself time or permission even to process that grief and that loss. So I kind of just kept moving forward and, wanting to be strong and just, okay, well, life goes on, right? What's next? And then I adopted our kids and then I became a mom and then I threw myself into that world and into that role. And yet, that pain of that loss, the 4 miscarriages was still there. And then what happened was there were a lot of challenges with our kids, our adoptive kids, especially the eldest one. There was a lot of trauma there. And of course, I had been through my own trauma with the miscarriages. So, there were a lot of issues because what she needed, I couldn't give her at that point. And what ended up happening is I kind of went into a depression and I felt like, I couldn't do it anymore and didn't know really what to do. So I just felt like I just don't want to be in pain. And I found myself, I picked up a bottle of pills one day. My husband had left for work. My kids had gone to school. And so I was ready to just, give up. And something inside of me said, no, it's not time for you to give up. And I put the pills away. I picked up the phone and I made an appointment with a therapist. And I started bereavement therapy to really process the pain and the loss of the 4 miscarriages. And that's really what got me started in my healing journey. And from there, I found the world of personal development. And I started reading books, listening to podcasts, attending, seminars and things like that. And I just started really learning about myself, learning about what those experiences had, what they meant to me, the meaning that I had given them. and I started moving forward from there. And I had already, excuse me, been doing coaching, but I was doing more leadership coaching, not, excuse me, not life coaching or transformational coaching. So after I went through, the therapy and entered the world of personal development, I was like, well, this kind of makes sense. This is my experience. I have been through that. On the other side now, still, learning as I go. But I really wanted to reach out and help other women who have experienced some type of loss. It can be, miscarriage. It doesn't have to be. Yeah, and decided to do that. And I recently got certified as a grief educator. So I've added that piece to my coaching, which is amazing, because it really, I see how it really benefits and helps my clients in so many ways.
Wow, Diana, and thanks for obviously being so open with us with your whole story and what's got you to this point. And obviously, me, so glad obviously you picked up that phone and you changed your life in that moment, and now you're helping other people's lives. And we were talking just before the show about what grief can mean, and then I was sharing my experience that kind of for me, I've experienced death of loved ones, unfortunately, including my brother when I was a very young age, and these kind of things. But can we touch a little bit upon that? Grief can be other things as well, right? It can be losing jobs, relationships, those kind of things, and we have to heal those kind of things as well, right?
Absolutely. Grief, it's not just about losing, a loved one. It can be, like you mentioned, the loss of a job, the loss of your health. In my case, I also experienced that. It really, it's personal. Let's just say that. People think that, grief is, a certain particular thing, but it means different things, and it's processed and felt by people in different ways. So there is no right way or wrong way to grieve. It's just a process. It's a very individual, personal process. And what I have found with my clients, and what I found with myself, is that when we don't process our grief, and then we experience another loss, and then another loss, and then another loss, there's a stacking process, and eventually it leads to us feeling stuck in some way, because we haven't really, we've bottled up those feelings. We haven't really released the emotions. We haven't processed for whatever reason. And and like you said, in order to heal, we really need to start looking at the different layers, processing each and every loss, because every loss is different. It's felt differently, and it's also grieved differently.
Yeah, I like what you said about it's personal how we like process them, and each loss is like different as well. And eventually it can like sort of hold us back. Do you find people, like from your own experience or kind of working with people in this area, that sometimes people are maybe even unconsciously avoiding processing it, like just through different ways?
Yeah, because it's, we tend to avoid pain, right? We tend to move away from pain. And in order to process grief, that's exactly what that process is to feel, the pain, the loss, the emotion, and just, start processing that, going through that. There's no way around it, right? We have to allow ourselves to feel whatever we feel. And that takes time, for some people. Again, that's another thing. There's no right or wrong amount of time to process grief. It's just an individual process. And then we have the added component of there's different types of grief. So, for example, there's complicated grief, right? And that means someone who has experienced multiple losses. And then you have that stacking, what I call the stacking process. And so, it's complicated grief because you have all these different layers. It's not just one thing that the person needs to process. It's just multiple. And they're at that point, they're all kind of like mixed up, intertwined,
Mm.
Yeah.
It's very personal that you're saying on it, and that makes sense because we all go through different experiences, right?
Yeah.
I know for me, like, just my own personal experience, like sometimes it's been like in different forms of even just like being kept busy through like work activities, even like admittedly you just scroll on your phone sometimes to just stop being alone with yourself and feeling. Like, I personally found that. I know it's a very common thing, doesn't necessarily mean everyone's avoiding it, but it's a very common habit. I know, like, for my 20s, I realized quite a lot of it was like it's pretty much a cycle of work, sport, football, regular footballer, and then like going out partying every Saturday. Cycle continued, and I came to a realization as I kind of hit 30, 32 now, but like, actually, yeah, there's quite a lot of running from emotions there without even realizing it, only to become more self-aware now to actually look back at it. So yeah, I just thought I'd share my own personal kind of mechanisms that perhaps I found running away, and even working with a somatic coach one-to-one personally was like, I'm like, okay, what are the right tools and what order do I need to do? He's like, why don't you just sit with yourself and feel these things? He's like, it's very uncomfortable. And I was like, okay, this is.
Yeah. And that's why, a lot of us avoid it, right? Because it is very uncomfortable. And that's not to say that, you need to process it all at once, in like one sitting. Like I said, it's over time, and it's a process, and it's okay because it can be overwhelming, very overwhelming. And so it's okay to, process what, a little bit at a time. And then you're like, okay, I need a break from this. And, that's also healthy. And I think that's why, grief support groups are so important and so necessary, because we have, we join a community of people that have experienced something similar. And we're able to be open and real and share and listen to other people, how they're processing their grief. And we don't feel alone anymore, because that's another thing, right? We feel, when we're going through grief, we feel alone. I know I felt that way, with the miscarriages, and I felt like I was the only one going through that. Now, obviously, I know, having worked with other women who have experienced miscarriages, that we shared very similar feelings. There's a lot of shame, there's a lot of guilt. And so it's really important to find, either another person or, a group where you can get the support that you need.
Love that. Like, similar feelings, like you mentioned, like shame there and things like that. And sometimes, unfortunately, again, just sharing from my own personal perspective, I found sometimes someone who's loving and not a bad person, just like, why don't you just focus on the positives? And it's quite an irritating comment, to be honest. It's like,
Yes.
it's a very irritating or
Yes.
very upsetting comment, actually. It's almost dismissing your feelings, but it's that I personally found in that instance. But when I'm around, like, oh, I've been through this, it's like, or other like-minded guys, it's like, yes. So I love what you said about the power community there.
Yeah. And that's very common, again, because what I learned going through, the grief educator certification, is that a lot of it, first of all, like, nobody really talks about grief. Nobody wants to talk about grief, right? And no one is really, like, we're not educated as to, like, how, if we have a friend or a loved one or someone, like you said in your case, like someone that has experienced a loss, and they're going, they're grieving, like, what do you say, and what's the best way to support them and help them through that pain. And sometimes, a lot of times, I found in my experience when I had the miscarriages, people are well intentioned, and they would say things meaning like, having the best intentions, but it was just not the right thing to say. I heard things like, well, at least you can get pregnant, or well, it was probably for the best. I mean, there was probably something wrong with the baby, or you'll be able to get pregnant again. Just things like that, which I know they were meant to make me feel better, I guess. But that's not what I needed to hear. In that moment, what I needed to hear is either just have someone sit with me and just let me cry, or just say something like, there are no words. There's nothing I can say. I'm so sorry that, that you're going through this. That's it. I had my parents, who I love, my parents, my dad is, deceased now, but when I was going through the first miscarriage, they were like, oh, it's going to be okay. Don't cry. Like and I understand that they meant well. They saw their daughter in pain, and they didn't want me to be in pain. Right. But that's not what I needed to hear. It's like, no, all I want to do is cry, and right now, no, things are not okay, and they probably won't be for a while. So it's just, and that's one of the things that I love to do, is teach people, how to hold space for someone that's grieving. I also learned this thing, which I was like, oh my God, I didn't think of that, but it makes total sense. If someone is crying, they're grieving and they're crying, and you're sitting with them, you think of, like, you grab a box of tissues and you put it in front of them, right? And I learned, like, that's not the thing to do, because when you do that, psychologically, the person is getting a message: stop crying.
Saw this the other day on a social media post, actually, as well.
Yeah. So I was like,
yeah, saw it on last year I've done like a bit of somatic sort of release, breath work, that kind of thing. And I find that's really healthy. It kind of gets into the body, and maybe some of those trapped emotions that were there. And yeah, they were saying, like, don't go up and say, it's okay, stop crying. It's like, it's just holding that space for them to cry. So yeah. It's interesting you say that, and I heard that message. I totally agree and resonate with it personally.
Yeah. And I think there are a lot of ways, like you mentioned, that somatic ways to release that. Sometimes the grieving, the grief, it's complicated because there's also trauma. Like, all trauma has grief, but not all grief has trauma. So there might be that component there as well.
Yeah. I want to go a little bit round in the to sort of touch on, like, when we talked about getting stuck, sometimes we can be a bit, you were touching on, we can be a little bit stuck with if we've got these unprocessed things going on in the background. Do you also have you found that impacts on someone's identity when we say stuck, a little bit lost in actually who they are if things are unprocessed?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's exactly what, can happen. Like I mentioned in my case, that's how I felt. I was stuck for many, many years. And because I hadn't processed all that, the grief and the loss. And although I thought I was moving forward, and I went on living my life, psychologically, there was a part of me that was just stuck in that place, grieving, grieving the loss, not just of the babies at that point, but also the loss of my identity as a mother, what I imagined myself. Also, like, my identity as a woman, because what does it mean if I can't have kids, right? As a woman, just because we're conditioned that way. And what does it mean? Like, what does my husband think now? Does he still love me because I can't have children? It's a lot of things that in this particular case are specific to women, right? In that role. And so it took a long time, like I said, a lot of healing and a lot of work and a lot of self-discovery to get in touch with that part of me that was kind of, let's say, kind of stuck in the past, in order to move forward and say, okay, so what does it mean now? Like, what is my new identity? Who do I want to be? Because I get to be whomever I want to be. And how do I create that new life, you know, um, with this new identity? Who do I have to become to um, to create the life that you want? And what is that life? And what does that look like? And what is that vision?
Mm. So you kind of like, I was going to ask you about that next, like how, and you kind of already answered it really, but yeah, how do we discover like our identity? Because quite a lot of us can be like quite lost and a little bit stuck. And obviously you talked about like the healing element, making sure, you're working through that, but then it's about sort of like choosing and then actually identifying what you want for your life as the next steps, it sounds like.
Yeah, yeah. And I think a lot of times we hear, or at least in my experience, and I've had some clients say the same thing. We look at our mentors or people who are doing like amazing things, and so we start to feel like, well, how can I ever get to that point, right? It seems like so far because we're still stuck back here. And what I always tell my clients, and even with myself, that's where we need to practice a lot of self-love, a lot of self-compassion. Again, try not to compare, because we're all on our own individual paths and journeys. And I know sometimes that's annoying to hear.
Mm.
And timing, it's again, it's a personal thing, right? And it might take me, much longer to process my stuff and to heal, the things that I need to heal, and start moving forward. But I I have learned to just be very, very patient with myself and just take, the steps that I can take and go at my own pace. It's not a race. It's just me, really, me and my life. So I what I try to do is just enjoy that process. Enjoy like every, each step that I take, each time that I move forward, just savor that and celebrate that, and be very proud of myself because I'm still moving forward, and not look around me to see, where this person is and that person is, because that can be sometimes very disheartening, right? And because we start comparing. So I think the best thing, and what I teach my clients is, that's when you practice that, self-compassion, and just be patient with yourself, and just be, that self-love, and it's okay. It's okay, because we're all doing it differently, because we're all doing it our own way. And that's how it should be.
Patience and and the self and compassion for yourself. Is there any out of curiosity, I like to ask people this, is there any effective practices you use like regularly on yourself for that self-love?
Yes, I personally like to journal. I like to write down, how I'm feeling. It helps me to, when I put stuff down on paper, it helps me to process, because then I can go back and read it again. I do meditate. One of the things that I love to do is just really to go on walks by myself, and not listen to, music or podcasts, even though sometimes I do, but just kind of be with myself. Just that whole thing. Maybe it's that what you mentioned about the somatic, work. Maybe it's that process of moving my body, walking and thinking, just being with my thoughts. That helps me. Sometimes for me, that's easier than like sitting still with my thoughts.
Hmm. Yeah, I've recently tried to incorporate more just walking into nature as well. It's kind
Mhm.
of the more spiritual side I got into, but it's like that energy for nature. And again, like I laughed when you said no music or podcasts or things like that, because like exactly what I've been doing as well. It's like that
Yeah.
stuff's great, and it's like in the gym, that
Mhm.
might be useful. Like I'm
Mhm.
working out or I'm running. I sometimes run, just being myself. But like yeah, that stuff can be great. Like NET, Tony Robbins calls it no extra time, all those kind of
Mhm.
things. But yeah, I found it quite beneficial and sometimes get like what they call like a download or an insight that I wasn't expecting. Um, and that's kind of come from somewhere where the noise has been closed down and feeling things sometimes or hearing things I've needed to hear as well.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, it's spending that alone time that really helps us to get in touch with ourselves and our feelings and really get to know ourselves, right? Because I think there's a lot of distractions, and nobody wants to really, or most people, I should say, don't want to be alone with their thoughts, because again, that means they have to face some things that may not want to, or may not be ready to face and and deal with.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. No, it's definitely been a beneficial practice for me. And yeah, those sounds like some great ways you're able to connect with yourself, like the journaling as well, and then recapping what you've written, and alongside the meditation as well as the walk. So, Diana, wow, like so many useful insights into like actually building a better connection with yourself, and actually the importance of processing things and what grief can mean. I'm really glad we touched on this today because yeah, it's something I've been working through, and yeah, I've firstly seen it for me and then other people come out in bad ways when it's not being processed as well. So yeah, I'm glad we're whatever the grief meant, whether it's death or a loss of something.
Mhm.
So it's really good that you're in this line of work and you're making an impact on lives. So yeah, just before we wrap up, Diana, where can the listener find you if they want to find out a little bit more about your work and perhaps get in touch?
Sure. They can find me on social media, on Instagram, at Diana Parra 888. They can also find me visit my website, dianaparainternational.com. Yeah,
Awesome. Yeah, be sure to link those ones up. So once again, Diana, really appreciate your time coming onto the show today. So thank you.
sure. Thank you.
So that concludes our episode for today. And remember, you are in control of your own self-esteem and confidence.